After you have selected your purpose or your goal in your speech, are you speaking to inform or to persuade, to entertain or to inspire? The next thing you have to think about is speech organization. And all of us know that a speech should have a clear beginning, middle, and end. But I can't stress enough how powerful having a very clearly organized speech can be. Scholars actually estimate that organization can increase your memory by 40%. It is like this un it is this tool that a lot of people just don't take advantage of. And it can make a huge difference when you're thinking about what exactly it is that you are trying to convey. I think about when we're going on a journey and somebody has been asked to pack all of our belongings. Some of you I really appreciate because you're so intentional about where you put things. And those who are really good at packing for a trip, both individually in the bag or maybe, the trunk associated with the trip, they will tell you that not only is it look nice, but more importantly, is that you can get a lot more in, and it also will make a lot more sense to anybody who were to look in your bag in order to find something, or to make sure that it all is able to be known. And so I think speech organization allows you to increase your audience's memory. They will not only be able to stay with you during the speech, but then after the speech, they'll be able to recall that information better. But also, it will allow you as the speaker to have more information if it's clearly organized. So, some things that I think are important when you're thinking about organizing the body of your speech. So, some tips that I have for you to keep in mind. One is that you are looking for 2 to 5 main points. And so anything beyond that is hard conceptually for people to be able to stay with you. So you need at least 2 main points because otherwise it really isn't a body. It really doesn't have any substructure. Or but you don't want to go much above 5 because your audience, if you have 10 subpoints or 10 main points, your audience will really lose where we're at. It's interesting. There's some psychology research about like how many brands can we like know well. If you were to ask somebody like, okay, what are some of the main, laundry detergent brands, you will notice that there's only probably about 5 that most people can come up with quickly. So that's why we've added others into a certain detergent because we could still use that brand name. So 2 to 5 main points. You're going to try to make each one of those main points distinct. So you're wanting to avoid overlap between your main points. And you might want to consider the word choice when you think about the pattern of the speech that you are creating. I'm sure many of you have heard that one of the things that people will tell you about public speaking is this acronym called KISS, which is keep it simple, sweetie. Sometimes people will say keep it simple, stupid. But it's this idea of, if you put you think about the word choice, you create parallelism, or maybe you make an acronym that makes a word. All of those things can really help your audience remember the information. And it can also help you as the speaker know where you're at in the speech and what comes next. Okay, the last tip I have for you is balancing your time. You want to have about the same amount of time on each one of your main points. You don't want one point to be 2 minutes, the other one to be 30 seconds, and then the next one to be 4 minutes. You kind of are thinking about balancing them. All of your main points support your thesis. And how could you do that in a way where they are very similar in nature? Now, I'm going to go through the different organizational patterns pretty quickly. You probably are familiar with these from your English classes in high school or perhaps from English 103 here at Ball State. The first one is chronological or communicating it in the sequence that something goes through. This will be a very popular organizational pattern that you would use in the informative speech in this class. If you don't use chronological, where you might talk about like here are the 4 steps, or this is what happens before, during, or after, you might turn to topical. And so the topical organizational pattern is where you just break it up into different topics. Often informative speaking, it's important if you are going to talk about something that is controversial that you give both sides of it. So sometimes in informative speaking, you might explain something and then you might explain the people who are happy about it and then the people who are mad about it. So you show both ranges in an informative speech. Those are very common informative speaking patterns. The next one is problem solution. That is very common in a persuasive style where you first introduce the problem, then you talk about the solution. Cause effect is often used in persuasive speaking also, where you explain what the causes were and then what that leads to, especially if your solution is very obvious and doesn't require its main point, and you are just explaining why it has happened and then all of the negative effects of it. One organizational pattern is narrative. We will use this organizational pattern in your toast speech. It is the story that drives your speech itself. And I think a lot of TED Talks use this narrative pattern. Spatial organization is the one that I think is used least, the least, and that is where you talk about relationships. But I think if you would think about how an architecture major or somebody who is, like pitching a design, it might make sense that you organize your speech spatially, how things are, organized in relationship to each other. Or you might organize by compare and contrast. That's a common informative speaking where you just, talk about comparing them, like what do they have in common and what do they have different, or the pro cons or the advantages or disadvantages. All of those are very similar where you're just showing the two sides. An organizational pattern that I wanted to introduce you to that I don't think is in your textbook, but I think is one that is nice to have in your back pocket. A lot of impromptu speakers use this as a quick way to organize their thoughts in a situation. And that is the what, so what, and now what. So, you can think about how if you were able to get somebody's ear in the elevator, in an elevator pitch, and that you want to tell them about your idea, that would be the what. Then the so what, like why that matters, right? Like the impacts that this could have on, the world or on individuals. And then the now what, where you would love to schedule a meeting where you could come and tell them more about your idea. So the what, the so what, and the now what, I think is are great organizational patterns for you to like just have in your back pocket when someone asks you a question about something that you didn't know that you were going to be speaking on the situation, that you can say the what, the so what, and the now what. Another organizational thing that I think is important is as a speaker is that you are going to have signposts and transitions between your main ideas. So when you have a speech that is organized by past, present, and future, that you would want to both signpost and have transitions between the introduction and then your first point, between your first and second point, and between your second and third point. Signposting is when you say to your audience where you are. So if you say, so in conclusion, that would be a sign point. If you said, my second point is, where are we right now? What is happening in the present? That would be a signpost. A transition would be where you link one point to the next point. So you would say, now that we understand where we are right now in the present, let's turn to the future. And then that would be the transition. So signposting and transitioning is really important. As a speaker, it helps make sure that you are organized. As an audience, it tells you exactly where you are and where you are headed. So as you begin to think about your speeches and the path that you are going to take, I really encourage you to, plan the body of your speech very, very clearly and think about how you can organize your main ideas, 2 to 5 of them in very clear ideas. Then you're going to create subpoints, which again, you will have 2 to 5 main subpoints so that your audience knows exactly where you are in your main points and in your subpoints so that they can follow along with clarity, which will help them be able to recall the information, understand it at the moment. And then you, as a speaker, are also able to really know where you are, and you're less likely to get lost throughout your presentation. So, organization is the key. You begin by writing the introduction or writing the body of your speech, and then you turn to the introduction, which is what you will find in the next speech.